Are you ready to keep developing your performance during the season, no matter how much playing time you get or what level you're competing at, and most importantly, without having to sacrifice your game day performance and get injured? Well, if you are, you just landed on the perfect video. If you are one of the players though, who believe that the gym is worthless and does little to nothing to improve your performance and help you stay healthy, then you might as well leave right now. Those players are usually the ones that experienced bad coaching from someone, stumbled across a football fascia guru that scared them off the gym without evidence, or just went to the gym doing what everyone else does around them, aka bodybuilding and postnatal workouts. Those players simply don't know the why behind their training actions, why they are using the set and rep ranges they are using, why they're using that 1 rep max percentage over the other, why they use a specific tempo, why they are resting for X time, why they are doing a specific exercise, and the list just goes on and on. Having said that, after watching this video, you will probably get to know the why behind most of the training decisions you make. Ultimately, my goal with this video is to help you become more aware of that why you are doing what you're doing, and hopefully change the stuff that needs to change and leave the guesswork to the side. So guys, it's Coach Elias here, and without further ado, let's jump right into the video. But before we do that, if you're really serious about your game, make sure you grab a notebook, write down the things you're about to check out, and make sure to watch every second of this video because I am holding nothing back for you. The first thing I would like to touch upon is the mistakes I see most players and coaches making when working out during the season. First one is that most players train like bodybuilders, focusing way too much on hypertrophy training and machines. Look, this type of training can definitely have a place and time throughout the training process, but I don't think it's a more appropriate solution for the vast majority of players. Why? A, because hypertrophy-based workouts are usually really high in volume, something that can mess up your game day form by causing too much fatigue and soreness, and B, because these workouts are focusing too much on aesthetics rather than performance. Instead of aesthetic-based workouts, we want you to start thinking about performance and how your workouts are going to impact it on game day. Is your workout getting you stronger, faster, more powerful, more resilient to injuries, etc., or is it just making you look better? Now, this type of work may be effective for you if you have just started working out or you're extremely skinny, but your performance-based results, not just how you look, will quickly plateau, and that is because the training stimulus you're feeding your neuromuscular system with is no longer enough to elicit any performance improvements. And that leads me to the next mistake I see, which is players and coaches are relying way too much on bodyweight workouts. I mean, I get it. It is the easy solution and a fundamental one as well if you're just starting out. But if you really want to see and feel how effective the gym can be for you, you just need to add extra resistance to the movements you're training in order to elicit even greater results. If you're a beginner though, start off with your body weight, take control of how your body moves, build foundational strength and tissue tolerance, and progressively get yourself inside the gym. You will not regret it. But if you do end up making that decision, forget about those 3x15 box jumps and deep squats you're probably doing. You gotta switch up the training principles you're using and move from hypertrophy and endurance to speed, strength, and power specific workout protocols. Don't worry though, because this is exactly what we are going to go over in today's video. Before we move on any further though, there is a crucial step we simply cannot neglect, and that is understanding the demands of the season in order to construct and design a proper training program. This, guys, is the first step we take every time we work with a new player or release a new training program online. This allows us to emphasize certain qualities of their game that are either A, season specific, or B, player specific. Now, for obvious reasons, we are going to focus on the season specific ones in this video, but you definitely can distinguish which of those are the ones you need to focus more on as an individual player. Having said that, the question that we start the needs analysis with is, what does an in-season player need that they are not getting enough of from competition? Now, based on the data that is currently available, we know that the physiological demands of the season are pretty high due to the strenuous game schedule that the vast majority of football federation worldwide adopt. To make this as simple as possible for you, I borrowed this small list from the theory manual that comes along with our in-season training programs that you can find linked below with all of the training stimuli a player typically wants to get exposure to year-round, followed by the exposure a player typically gets to that stimulus during the season from team training plus games. By viewing the left and the middle sections of this table, you can quickly understand what the missing links in your training are during the season. For example, since you're getting a relatively low exposure to top velocity sprinting during team sessions and games, it does make sense to expose yourself to some top velocity sprints during the week. This is not to say though that you shouldn't stress the qualities that you're already getting lots of exposure to, such as change of direction actions and plyometrics. You should probably get exposure to these as well, but at a much smaller dose and in a controlled manner. It simply will not make sense to to expose you to countless cuts, turns, and jumps, while you're already getting exposed to these actions a lot during games and team practices. Instead, we want to alter the training load and bring it down to the so-called minimal effective dose. Now, before we start laying out the foundations of a well-structured in-season training program, I wanted to quickly help you define some of the key performance indicators of your game. In order to do that, ask yourself, which training qualities have the highest transfer to my performance and why? To save you some time, these training qualities are visible on the force velocity curve and are max strength, power, and speed. Alongside these though, you can add motor pattern efficiency and conditioning. Today we're going to focus on the first three, which most players tend to confuse as terms. So let's get you aware of them pretty quickly, starting off with strength. Strength is the ability to exert force. Max strength is the most amount of force your neuromuscular system can produce in a single voluntary muscle contraction. Max strength is a vital component of one's game, especially for those players that are getting involved in physical battles a lot. It also offers a great crossover to power and speed development and is one of the primary ways to significantly decrease the risk of injury. Think of it like this. If your muscles, joints, tendons, and bones are able to handle and tolerate high forces, you are much less likely to get injured, no matter if we're talking about an ankle sprain, a hamstring tear, or an ACL. On the other hand, we have power. Power basically is your ability to produce high force outputs at a really fast rate. In the world of physics, power is equal to force multiplied by velocity. In the context of football performance though, power is a really important physical measure that is present in almost any action you can think of, whether we are talking about shooting, passing the ball, or whenever you're jumping, cutting, or accelerating for 5 meters. Simply put, football is a power-dominant sport. Just like a bodybuilder who is lifting for strength and hypertrophy, all actions you perform require high force outputs. The difference between you and a bodybuilder though is the speed at which you produce those high force outputs. For example, lifting iron for aesthetics is not a time limited action. Sprinting to the ball though is something that is limited by time and requires a powerful acceleration in those first 5 to 10 meters. So in that sense, a player just like you does not only need to be strong but also exert that strength fast in order to meet the demands of the game. And the same applies to fast players as well. You might be fast, but if you're not strong, your power outputs are going to be low, and as a result, you will get thrown all over the place in those physical battles. Everybody benefits from just a tiny bit more power. Apart from power though, anyone would also benefit from just a bit more speed. Now speed, or better said velocity, is a measure of how much time you need to get from point A to point B. There are basically two types of speed, linear and multidirectional speed. Now if you think of players like Mbappe or Haaland, you understand that both qualities are important in the modern game. A game that is heavily characterized by insane top velocities and lightning fast cuts and turns no matter what position you're playing. Now all of this is great information that helps you gain a clear understanding of what you need to improve on, but it's time to get more practical and specific and talk about how you can effectively structure a workout as an in-season footballer, either getting full 90-minute games or getting little to absolutely no game time. As you may already know, this isn't going to be a bro split, a post-NLP Pilates workout, or a yoga session. We're going to break down a typical strength and power workout and speed session that meets the demands of your season. Don't take this as a one-size-fits-all solution though, and instead adjust the contents and the structure based on your goals and competitive schedule. This is just for guidance and direction. So let's start off with the anatomy of a lower body strength and power-based gym workout for football. As you may already know from our previous videos, we typically structure a workout in an energy-efficient manner, meaning that high-intensity and really demanding tasks are placed towards the start of a session to ensure that your energy stores are full and you can perform each repetition with maximal effort and therefore yield maximal results. These usually are power or speed-based exercises like plyometrics, ballistics, or loaded power movements. As the session progresses, the focus shifts from power-based actions to more volume-based and strength-related tasks, with maximal strength exercise being prioritized before you move into less intense and more hypertrophy and general strength-based tasks. So make sure you screenshot this and keep it as a guiding tool to coordinate your training sessions. Now the volume of each part of the workout and the exercise selection is a topic that is completely based on context, aka what the focus of your training block is, as well as what day you're working out, what your training experience and tolerance is, the equipment you have available, etc. etc. Now another option that is really popular, especially amongst teams, is full body workouts, which are meant to keep the lower body training stress at humanly normal levels and minimize the negative effects on performance. The way to structure these remains identical to the lower body session anatomy, aka neurally demanding task placed in the beginning and volume-based exercise placed in the end. The only difference is that the lower body lifts get blended in with core work and upper body lifts again to minimize DOMs on the lower body, yet still get an adequate training stimulus. When it comes to the speed sessions though, the landscape somewhat changes, and that is because all efforts are and should be intense and neurally demanding. In this instance, we like to switch things up a bit. Motor pattern work like skips, hops, and wall drills are placed in the beginning because the last thing we want to do is blend fatigue and technique together and produce energy-poor mechanics. Then we transition to plyometrics and ballistics and move from extensive to more intensive ones. And finally, the main dish, sprinting. Now, since our players are getting adequate exposure to cutting and turning, we primarily focus on top velocity sprinting and linear accelerations in season and keep the agility and change of direction drills at much lower volumes to avoid overuse injuries. The total sprint distance is once again dependent on the playing level of the individual and how much game time the player gets. Obviously, the more playing time you're getting, the less exposure to high speed running you will need. However, the only two things I want you to focus on during your speed sessions are to A. Sprint with maximal intent and effort, and B. Rest adequately in between sprints, probably around 1 to 2 minutes per 10 meters sprinted. These two will ensure you're actually improving speed and not speed endurance, so pay attention to the details, guys. Now, in terms of upper body training, I like to be free and stick with what the individual likes, whether that is weightlifting, calisthenics, or a mix. All sorts of core work is a staple though, and we typically alternate between push and pull exercises. Nothing special, nothing fancy. Now, these 3 to 4 sessions are usually what make up a training week during the season. Now, notice once again that this is not a one-size-fits-all solution, and the number of weekly sessions varies greatly from player to player, from team to team, and from week to week. For example, Bob, a player that is playing a lot on weekends and trains almost every day with his team, will probably be on the lower end volume-wise, while Patrick, a player with a lighter team and game schedule, will have more time to double down on his development and might even consider more than 3 to 4 sessions. That again is something you need to figure out for yourself or get individual guidance for. Having said that, let's now go over how to structure a week from an energy efficiency perspective to ensure peak game day form, health, and career longevity. The number one thing we'll look at when programming for the training week is the day of the game. If you know the date of the main event, it's all a matter of working backwards. For the purpose of this video, let's say you're playing a game every Sunday. That 24 to 48 hour window after the game is typically invested into active recovery. So game day -6 or -5 is usually a day to relax, do some light conditioning, mobility, and foam rolling. On top of those activities though, some players might want to add some additional conditioning or upper body work, as these tend to be lower on the intensity scale in comparison to speed sessions and lower body or full body workouts. Now, as you might have noticed earlier in this video, I mentioned that any extra training tasks that places stress on your neuromuscular system should generally be avoided as you're nearing game day. So if you're looking to get in a speed, full body, or lower body session during the game week, make sure to do that as early as you can and generally before game day -2 or -3. We are doing that to avoid the associated DOMs occurring on game day and interfering with your performance. Also, if you end up doing all sessions, it would be wiser to do the speed session first to ensure maximal effort is truly maximal and then proceed with the other ones later on in the week. However, if you're considered a fast player, you might as well leave that speed work for later in the week, keep the volume relatively low, and just use it to maintain health and peak for your game. But what if you're a pro with a full team schedule and playing each weekend? Well, no excuses here as well. Whenever we work with pro or full-time semi-pros, there are 2 training concepts we heavily use with them, and those are microdosing and the minimal effective dose. We're basically breaking down each session into little pieces and scattering those pieces throughout the whole training week. So in this instance, you might be seeing a pro player of ours hitting the gym almost every day, but the workload is kept at the minimal effective dose and everything is done fast and precisely, probably in under 20-30 minutes. By doing this, you're balancing both peak performance and development. It now makes sense to say that developing your game in season, either as a pro, a full-time semi-pro, or an amateur, isn't a myth, but a reality that you must start accepting if you want to reach the top. You gotta do it properly though. And speaking about the top, you also need to start being more intentional and deliberate with your programming. I have a quick question for you. Are you targeting the areas you need to target, or are you just guessing? And if you are targeting them, is your programming versatile and well periodized throughout the season, or is it all over the place? That was the number one problem I kept hearing when I was creating the in-season editions of our online training programs. So I tried battling it by creating 4 different training blocks for each one of our training programs, which ultimately lead to the fine-tuning of the primary physical quality you choose, whether that is strength, speed, or power. Instead of following the same plan for the entire season, switch things up every 4 to 6 weeks, change the focus of your training, and alongside it, change the rep and set ranges you use, change the structure and the ratios you use each exercise type, progress or regress exercises, and find ways to challenge your neuromuscular system on a whole new level. Now, in case you want to leave all the guesswork to the side, our in-season training programs will absolutely transform your game as well as the way you think about training overall. So if you're interested in any of them, hit the link below and start your upgrade with a 25% discount using code YT25. Okay, so we got the basic outline. Now let's move on to a quickfire Q&A based on the questions I received from you guys from my latest story on Instagram and the email I have sent to everyone that subscribed to my exclusive email list. So number 1, how many times should I work out in season? So the thing with training load management is a bit difficult to answer because you have all sorts of players watching. Grassroots, amateurs, all the way up to pros. So there is no definitive answer to that, but as a rule of thumb, you should try to work individually anywhere between 1 to 4 times per week, whether that is inside the gym or on the pitch. This number might even increase if you decide to microdose smaller training units into your everyday life, just as we usually do with our pros and full-time semi-pros. Obviously, the more playing time you get, the less time and energy you will have available to invest into your own self, but there's absolutely no problem with that, since peak performance is the main focus in season. You see, one of the greatest problems hardworking players just like you have to deal with in season is the desire to do the extras. There's a fine line between effective and detrimental. If you end up doing too much, you might compromise your game day performance, and if you compromise your performance, you might lose your starting spot, and this will basically kickstart a downward spiral in your career. Just focus on fine-tuning your performance for game day and get in some individual work if you can as early in the week as possible. Nothing more, nothing less. Now, number 2, how can I prepare for an important game? There are basically 2 answers for that. Number 1 is to decrease training volume by either doing less individually or just performing a deload week. And number 2, which I think is more effective, is to alter the focus of your training block into something more intense and peaking specific. Number 2 is also the option I include as a bonus in all of my in-season training programs, because once again, game day performance is the priority, and it would make no sense for me to just throw a training program at you without taking your important game weeks into consideration. Both options obviously work, but the latter one is probably the most effective one from a neural standpoint to basically excite your neuromuscular system for performance. Now, number 3, how to progress things. Before I jump into this, I wanted to address something else first. Do you even need to implement progressive overload all the time? Well, if you aren't playing that much, yes, you might want to consider progressively increasing training volume or intensity based on what you want to get out of your workouts. However, if you are playing games often and want to perform at your peak on game days, week in and week out, then you might want to adopt a better approach that's more cautious in regards to load management. You see, it doesn't make sense to constantly increase the training load every week if, let's say, you have a really important game in 3 weeks. That's why in our online coaching, we ask our players in advance about their most important games so we can categorize them into 3 to 5 different levels based on how important or difficult the game is. This will then help us identify which training weeks or even months we need to peak and intensify our training, and which weeks or months we can shift the focus more on development. So let's go back to that question about how to progress things, if it actually makes sense to make progress and focus on development. It's another question that you cannot really answer in a simple sentence because it depends, because everyone is different and adapts to training differently. Having said that, there are literally a ton of ways you can progress a training program. You can progress it based on load by increasing or decreasing repetitions, sets, or the external load you use. You can progress based on movement efficiency by moving from simple to more complex movements. And you can also progress based on the focus of your training block. That's something completely up to you and your coach to decide, but most of the time it is going to be a mix of all 3. And now, number 4, what exercises should you use to really make that upgrade in your game happen this season? Look, if you have been following and watching our videos for long, you already know that I'm not a fan of promoting specific exercises as the best. Instead, I like to rely on principles and combine those principles with the appropriate exercise selection based on the player that I have in front of me. So if we were to talk about exercise categories and not specific exercises that I use with my athletes, both online and in person, but also inside my training programs, I would go for heavy weightlifting and overcoming isometrics for max strength development, lifts for general strength and yielding isometrics for general strength development, plyometrics and ballistics for speed, power, and rate of force development, sprinting, cutting, and turning variations to target top velocity, speed, acceleration, and change of direction ability, and technical motor skill drills to enhance and fit your movement into an energy efficient range. Those are the exercise categories that I structure all of our programs on. Of course, the specific exercises I use can hugely vary based on the needs of the individual and their training block focus, but that is something you are either going to decide by yourself or with a qualified S&C coach. And talking about an S&C coach, I'd like to take a moment and go over how we can help you get closer to your ultimate vision. First of all, we have recently created a series of 3-month training programs that you can invest in and receive immediately if you want to leave all the guesswork of the season to the side and finally transform your athleticism. And of course, for all of you that don't know, I personally work with pro and semi-pro players one-on-one, both in person and online, and help them level up their strength, power, speed, and conditioning, and create tailored plans to help them upgrade their technical skills, and master the problem-solving ability required in their position. I couldn't forget to mention the free training guides we have created that you can find all linked below at no extra cost. Okay guys, that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed watching this extensive webinar-like video. Let me know what you're going to change about your in-season training and whether you like the depth of this video. Would you maybe like to see part 2 of this video where I go over off-season training? Just let me know down in the comments and I will start working on it ASAP. Have a good one, guys.